Hi guys, I'm going to film a work project I have here. I'm going to replace the tilt trim motor on my Honda outboard. And the problem that I'm having is that the outer casing of the motor rusts out and is gone. I mean holes in it. The OEM Honda motor casing looks like this. Now this is actually a replacement of that, which I'm not able to use for a number of reasons I don't want to get into. So I can't replace it by OEM, but these things have the magnets inside a steel shell. And the problem is that the steel shell rusts out. So what I've done, or what I did a year ago, was to buy an aftermarket unit for cheap, about $100, and I put it on there. It worked great. It's still working great. But the outside of it completely rusted out. So what I've done is I spent a little more money. This is a Sierra brand tilt trim motor, and I'm hoping I can get a little more life out of this. You just bolt it on the OEM base. It's pretty simple. Again, I'm worried about this outer casing rusting out. So what I'm going to do is try to protect that a little more. Give it a little extra protection against the salt water. I mean, I really fish in brackish water, but it's still salty enough to rust that steel. So what I'm going to try is a Permatex product. It's called liquid electrical tape. I'm just going to paint it on the outside, a couple of coats, however many coats it's going to take. So this product comes, it's kind of like the PVC pipe glue can. So it's got a little brush on the inside. So I'm going to come back with quite a few coats. It's supposed to be 4 hours between coats. So I'll get a couple coats on tonight. I'm going to do the big job tomorrow. So I want to get this thing ready by the morning. So good morning. It's the next morning after I was painting my trim tilt motor, and I've gotten 3 coats on there. It seems really like I've got a good thick coating on there, and I'm hopeful that that's going to make a difference on the longevity of this particular unit. So now got to get down to the real work, getting this thing apart. So this motor, this cheap motor, works fine. So you see that it works just fine. But I'll show you what it looks like in here. So this is the motor that I'm talking about. You can see how rusted that is. So Honda, in their wisdom, did not make it easy to take apart this particular part, or to replace that motor, really to do anything on the tilt trim unit. And it's all basically because of this shoulder on the transom mount bracket. Most of the manufacturers have it set up where, if you take the top pin off, the top of the hydraulic cylinder, and you take a bar off, this would all just fold, just basically flip right out, and then you could do whatever you want to on that. But Honda's not set it up that way. You have to take the motor off the boat, because you have to be able to split this apart. To be able to, you take this, there's a stud in here, it goes through, and then you have to be able to split this apart so you can get the hydraulic pump part out past this, outside of this bracket, to get it off. And then from there it's pretty easy. You just take this pin out, and the top of the cylinder will come off, and then you've got it. And this is just for bolts to take the motor off of the pump unit. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to lift the engine. Okay, now that I have my crane hooked up so that I can take weight off of the engine, I have to take the 4 transom bolts off. They're 2 on each side. These are 3/4 inch bolts. On my Ancona Cayenne flats boat, the transom is set up, as you can see here. So these bolts are actually, if you look on this side, you'll see that they're quite high on the transom. So they're, when I open up the well, take the well cover off, you see they're right here. This is the bottom bolt of the engine, way up here. And this is the top bolt. So this transom sticks up about 6 inches above the deck of the boat. It certainly makes it easy to get in there and take the engine off. So these are caulked in, so I'm going to loosen the bolt. I'm going to leave a nut on there. I should put it back on again. And then I'm going to hit the nut with a rubber mallet. Okay, so I've got the motor detached from the boat. See, it's hanging free there. So I've got to take this pin out. This is just with the cotter pin. This is the stop bracket, stop bar. So I first have to loosen the stud that connects the trim unit to the boat, to the stern bracket. So this is a 14 millimeter bolt. And I can just pull this out. It's right out. Now there's one more little operation I've got to do. You see there's a zinc plate here, for corrosion, sacrificial zinc plate. So I've got to take these 2 bolts off, and then that will be all the bolts connecting the stern bracket together. I'm really careful with all the nuts, especially or bolts, especially small ones like this, because I'm worried about twisting them off. You know, because corrosion will put a little bit of tension on the threads, and then you can easily twist these little ones off. So I'm really careful about not putting too much torque into it when I'm loosening any of these small bolts. I am going to put anti-seize on all of these bolts and all the threads of anything I take apart before I put it back together. We took the stud out, but there's also a sleeve in here. There's a washer. There's also a sleeve right here. And I had to kind of work that to get this side of the bracket to fall out off of it. But this is in here, and there's one of these, kind of like a Belleville washer on either side. So now I have a little retainer clip right up in here. This is just a pin that connects the top of the cylinder into the main engine bracket. So there's 2 electrical connectors on here. One is the main power connector, which is here, and then there's another one for the switch. There's also a rubber grommet here, which you can, just a split grommet. That's fills the hole where the wires come into the housing of the engine. There's another one down here. You can pull this off as well. Hang on to those. And then you can feed these wires out this hole. Both of the clips will go through this hole. So you see I just turned that a little bit, which loosened the unit. Now I have the unit just hanging here. It's still connected at the top. But there is a position switch up in here on the inside. So it's easier to get that disconnected while you still have this thing hanging there. You have the cylinder, the whole tilt trim unit hanging here. So the little limit switch is up inside here. It's a little hard to get to, but it's up inside here. It's got 10 millimeter fasteners. So you got to get up in there. You just take it off. The whole switch comes off with the wire attached to it. Okay, and there's that unit right there. It's got those 2 10 millimeter fasteners. Alright, so we have everything free. I have all the electrical off. And now we just got to take off this retaining clip and knock the pin out, and this unit's ready to go on the bench and have the motor replaced. So I'm just going to use a screwdriver to pull this split ring off. Now I should be able to push this through. There's a split ring on this side as well. This bracket is in the way. That'll come out now. And there you have it. That unit. Oh, look at the back side of this thing. Look at that. That is horrible. Completely rusted. There are no holes in it yet, but it would have been holes pretty soon. So I've already put the new motor on the tilt trim pump unit, and this is the old motor, but you can see that these are different connectors. So this is the new motor's connectors. This is the original wiring. Now theoretically these are actually the same connectors inside. It's the same blade type connector, but I have not been able to get this connector apart. So the last time I changed this motor, I just cut the wires and spliced them with waterproof butt terminals. So I'm going to do the same here because I don't want to tear up this plug, and I don't know how to get. Dang, scared the crap out of me. There's a, look at that. That is a hummingbird. Came right in my shop. Thought it was a giant bee. Okay, back to the work after that interruption by the hummingbird. So what I'm going to do to get these two wiring systems to match, I'm going to cut this off, keep the original plug, and I'm going to splice on with the new plug. Again, at least they've kept the wires blue and green, so I don't have to worry about the wiring connections. And the other wire that you saw is for this switch, for the limit switch or position switch. So it doesn't connect to the motor at all, so I don't have to worry about that. It's all inside this cable wrap. That's why it looks like there were two wires together. Okay, so I've got this butt splice, waterproof butt slice, and in a 10 to 12 gauge. But the reason they're waterproof is because you heat shrink them around the wire. So blue and blue, green to green. So now I have to heat shrink the ends of the butt splice terminal, and that'll shrink it down to the wire, and it'll be waterproof. This is a MAP gas torch. Obviously much more heat than I need, but it is very effective. So that should be waterproof. The connectors cinch down nicely right over the wires. So here is the unit with the new motor on it. This isn't going to look exactly OEM because I had a lot of problems getting this unit apart the first time I replaced the motor. This is a 17-year-old motor, and there was a lot of oxidation on fasteners and stuff. A lot of bolts just wouldn't come apart, so I ended up having to break. These just broke off twisted off because they weren't coming off. There's no way. So I drilled them out and drilled down through the casing so I could put a bolt through, and I had to do that on 3 of the 4 connectors. This one I was able to save, but I had to drill through. So now I just have bolts fastening the unit onto the housing of the tilt trim. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put these wires together and wrap this cable wrap over them again. So I'm going to test this thing. So I've connected, put the connector back in, and now I'm using the switch on the engine here. And getting a lot of movement. Sounds good. Should be fine. Okay, and I'm just going to hang it back on the motor bracket as a starting point for my next activity. I'm going to put a little bit of marine grade grease on this pin before I slide it in there. Okay, so that's now supported. It's going to be easier for me to work on everything. So the next thing I'm going to do is connect up a limit switch or position switch, because this thing's hard to get to. But I'm going to start out by putting more anti-seize on these 10mm bolts. And this is a Permatex product, which is the same brand as that liquid electrical tape that I used to coat the new motor. This is how it's going to go in, and I'm going to put the wires through right now so I don't forget about that. So this is the bolt that connects everything together. I've been cleaning the threads on all of these bolts before I put stuff back together. Just run a wire brush over them, and then I will be putting anti-seize back on that. This next operation can be a little bit tricky because there's a lot of moving parts. I've got to put this cylinder in, or this, you call it a sleeve. I've got to get these 2 washers on each side, and then this bolt runs through the whole thing. So you can see now that the bolt's sticking out this side. And I'm going to put some anti-seize on the threads there before I put this thing back together. And there is a washer and a nut. Goes back on here. 14mm. Now before I get too crazy on tightening that down, I want to get this zinc cathode back on to make sure that everything lines up with it. And the one thing I always have to remember with this unit is I've got to put this stopper bar back in here because of the tunnel, the recessed transom. I can't get this in or out once the transom is hooked up, once the engine's bolted to the transom. So now we just got to put it back on the boat. So on my Cayenne, I'm putting it at this position, which is the second hole up from the bottom. So it's very high on the transom, and I can run it so high because of my tunnel. I've got a tunnel down here. I've got a pocket tunnel down here in the bottom of the boat, so I can have the center line of my prop basically in line with the bottom of the actual boat, because I get this 3-inch additional water that comes up through the tunnel to feed the prop. So therefore I'm setting it very high. This is a little more of the risky part because I've got to drop it I gotta lower the crane down a little bit, but slowly. So I'm gonna have to drop it down a little bit more. It's really nice having the hydraulics on this crane. Because you can just crack the valve and it'll slowly drop. Done. Another successful repair.